The city was drowning in rain, each drop smacking against the window pane of Benny's small apartment, mirroring the storm inside her heart. She sat at a small wooden table, the only light in the room coming from the single, flickering candle on the birthday cake she had bought for herself. Her phone buzzed, vibrating against the table. For a fleeting, hopeful moment, her heart leaped. Maybe they remembered. But when she unlocked the screen, her hands went cold, her breath catching in her throat. The message was from her parents. "Benny, we've decided it's time you learn to stand on your own feet. We are cutting off all financial support. Don't expect anything from us anymore." She read the words again and again, disbelief turning into a cold, hard ache in her chest. On her 28th birthday, the very parents she had been secretly propping up for years had just cut her off. They had no idea. They had no idea that the company funding their extravagant lifestyle, from their fleet of luxury cars to their sprawling mansion, was kept alive by one silent signature on the bottom of every single check. Hers. Just a few hours earlier, she had walked into that same mansion, clutching a small, neatly wrapped gift. Rain had soaked the shoulders of her simple coat, but she carried a flicker of hope. It was her birthday, after all. Even though no one had called, she imagined a small surprise waiting for her. Maybe just a cake, maybe just a warm happy birthday. Instead, she was met with a blast of music and loud, cheerful laughter. The house was alive with decorations, balloons, and guests dressed in their finest, but it wasn't for her. It was for her younger sister, Lee. Everyone was swarming around Lee, congratulating her on a recent promotion, snapping photos as she posed beautifully, praising her success. Benny stood awkwardly by the doorway, a faint, forced smile plastered on her face, waiting for a single person to notice she was there. Finally, her mother turned, her eyes landing on Benny with a deep frown. "Benny, don't just lurk in the shadows like that. This is Lee's night, not yours," she said, her voice sharp and dismissive. "Try not to make everything about yourself for once." The words were like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. Benny could only manage a whispered, "Happy for you, Lee," before retreating to a forgotten corner of the room. She watched as her parents raised their glasses, toasting to Lee's brilliant future, their faces beaming with pride. No one invited her to join the family photos. No one offered her a glass of champagne. No one even remembered what day it was. The lump in her throat grew so large she could barely breathe, and she fought back the tears that burned behind her eyes. After the guests had trickled out and the lights were dimmed, Benny slipped out the front door, her own small gift still clutched in her hand. The bus ride home was a blur of city lights streaking through her tears. Back in her tiny apartment, she had placed the small cake on the table and lit the lone candle, whispering to the empty room, "Happy birthday, Benny." And that's when the message arrived. The final, cruel confirmation that she meant nothing to them. Her hands trembled as she stared at the screen, the words burning into her memory. The candle flame danced, casting long shadows on the wall, slowly melting away beside the untouched cake. That night, something inside Benny shifted. She made a silent vow. She would not shed another tear for people who refused to see her value. One day, they would understand exactly who she was and the sheer magnitude of what she had done for them. But by the time they did, it would be far, far too late. The next morning, Benny sat at her expansive desk, gazing at the city skyline from the floor-to-ceiling window of her quiet, minimalist office. To her family, she was just Benny, the girl with a simple 9-to-5 job at a small, unimportant firm. The truth, however, was a secret she guarded with immense care. She was the silent majority shareholder and hidden investor behind the primary partner company of Doro Holdings, her family's business. Every large payment that landed in her parents' account, the ones they attributed to their smart family investments, originated from a decision she made, an approval she gave. They truly believed their success was their own doing. They had no idea that every single check they cashed, every luxury they enjoyed, was underwritten by her name, her silent signature keeping their entire world from collapsing. It had all started years ago. Her old boss and mentor, the kind-hearted Mr. Lamy, had seen a spark in her that her own family was blind to. Before he passed away, he left her his controlling shares in his burgeoning investment company. "You have the mind of a leader, Benny," he had told her, his voice weak but his eyes clear. "One day, these shares will be your voice." He was right. Over the years, she had nurtured that inheritance, growing it into a position of incredible power, giving her quiet control over major corporate partnerships. One of those partnerships was with her family's own Doro Holdings. She never told them. She didn't crave their praise or attention. All she ever wanted was for them to live comfortably, to see them happy. even if she was never the source of that happiness in their eyes. So, every month, she quietly signed off on the payments, ensuring the partnership continued to funnel money into their lives. The expensive cars her father collected, the designer wardrobe her mother flaunted, Lee's endless shopping sprees and luxurious apartment, all of it was funded by the money she silently controlled. But in their world, Benny remained the average, unambitious daughter. She would listen with a patient smile as they bragged endlessly about Lee's promotion at the company Benny secretly owned. She often had to suppress a sad smile when her parents would say things like, "Our company is so blessed. We must have a guardian angel investor watching over us." They had no idea their guardian angel was the same daughter they consistently ignored and looked down upon. There were moments, late at night, when the loneliness felt crushing, and she wanted to lay it all bare, to show them the documents and finally make them see her worth. But then she would remember the cold sting of her mother's words at the party, and the heartless birthday message that followed. So she held her secret tighter. Her power was quiet, but it was absolute. Her name didn't need to be in the headlines. It was already written in the fine print of every document that kept their gilded world afloat. They lived in blissful ignorance, convinced of their own brilliance. But soon, they would be forced to learn that their entire foundation rested on the daughter they had so carelessly dismissed. And when that day came, Benny wouldn't have to raise her voice. Her silence would be deafening. A few days after being cut off, Benny drove to the mansion. She didn't go to plead or to start a fight. She went because a small, foolish part of her still needed to understand. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe there was a reason. She stood before the tall, imposing white gates, a place she once felt a sense of belonging. Now, she just felt like a stranger. The security guards eyed her with confusion before one of them reluctantly called inside. A moment later, her father, Mr. Doro, appeared at the grand entrance. He looked at her not with warmth, but with a weary irritation. "Benny, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice devoid of any kindness. She took a steadying breath, keeping her own voice soft. "I came to talk. The message, it really hurt me. I've always tried to help this family in any way I could. Why would you do that?" He let out a heavy sigh, shaking his head as if dealing with a troublesome child. "Benny, we simply can't keep carrying you. You're a grown woman. It's time you stood on your own. Be more like your sisters, successful, confident, useful." His words struck her harder than a slap. Carrying her. The irony was so bitter it almost made her laugh. They had absolutely no clue that she was the one carrying them all. From inside, Lee's laughter drifted out into the cold air. She emerged into the doorway, dressed in a new designer outfit, dangling a new set of car keys. "Oh, Benny," she said with a condescending smirk. "Dad is right. You really should try working harder. Not everyone gets to live off other people's success forever." The smug look on her face made Benny's chest tighten with a pain so sharp it took her breath away. She let her eyes drift around the opulent mansion, the glittering chandeliers, the perfectly polished marble floors, the priceless art on the walls. Every single item they took for granted was a product of her silent, thankless work. For a split second, an intense urge to scream the truth surged through her. She wanted to pull out the documents, to shove the proof in their faces, and watch their arrogant expressions crumble, but she reined it in. Instead, she straightened her spine, a calm, unreadable smile touching her lips. "You're right," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I should stop depending on others." Her mother, who had been watching from the doorway, nodded with cold approval. "It's for your own good, Benny. This will force you to become stronger." Benny met her mother's gaze and nodded slowly. "Yes," she replied. "It will." She turned and walked away without another word. As she walked back down the long driveway, her heart felt like it was breaking into 1,000 pieces. But beneath the pain, something new and solid began to form. That was the last time she would ever seek their love or approval. She wouldn't argue, she wouldn't explain, she wouldn't try to prove her worth. She would let her actions speak for her. And when the time was right, a single stroke of her pen would teach them the lesson they so desperately needed to learn. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of complete silence from her family. Benny didn't mind. She poured herself into her work, finalizing deals and preparing to launch a new division of her company, this time under her own name. While she was building her future, the world her family had built began to crack and splinter. It started with a single, sterile email that arrived in the main inbox of Doro Holdings. It was from their largest and most crucial partner, company, the one Benny controlled. The message was brutally brief. "Due to internal restructuring, all payments and partnership activities are hereby frozen, effective immediately." There was no warning, no phone call, no explanation, just a sudden, chilling silence. Within hours, a quiet panic began to ripple through the company. The head of accounting called Mr. Doro, his voice strained. "Sir, the monthly investment funds haven't arrived." At first, Mr. Doro dismissed it as a simple administrative delay, but as the next day came and went with no money, the panic turned into full-blown terror. The flow of cash had been severed completely. Salaries, vendor payments, loan interests, their entire operation depended on that single, massive cash injection. Without it, Doro Holdings was dead in the water. The company began to hemorrhage money. Angry vendors flooded their phone lines demanding payment for outstanding invoices. The bank sent formal notices regarding overdue loans. At home, the consequences were just as swift. Lee tried to pay for a lavish spa day, only to have her credit card publicly declined in front of her gossiping friends. She tried to laugh it off as a silly bank error, but a cold knot of fear was tightening in her stomach. The days bled into a nightmare of chaos. Investors who had once praised Mr. Doro's genius now pulled out their funds without a second thought. The household staff, from the gardeners to the maids, began to leave one by one as their paychecks stopped coming. Mrs. Doro's nights were filled with furious, whispered arguments with her husband. How could this happen? Who is this investor? Call them. Lee would cry to her mother, her face stained with tears. We can't lose all of this. Do something. But they couldn't. They had no name, no contact number, no clue who the mysterious benefactor truly was. All they knew was that without them, their world was collapsing into ruin, while the Doro family scrambled in a desperate panic. Benny worked peacefully in her new, sunlit office space. The name on the glass door was simple and elegant: Benny Doro Enterprises. This was something she had built for herself, with no need to hide in anyone's shadow. She would catch snippets of news about the financial troubles at Doro Holdings. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel small or invisible. She felt a quiet, profound sense of freedom. Her phone was buzzing, but with messages from former Doro employees and industry contacts, all eager to work for her new, thriving company. A faint smile touched her lips. The tables had finally, irrevocably turned. The family that saw her as a burden was now drowning, and they had no idea that the very daughter they had cast away was the only one who could have saved them. Benny didn't need to say a word. Life itself was showing them who held all the power. As the Doro's empire crumbled, Lee's carefully constructed facade of perfection began to shatter. She couldn't handle the loss of the luxurious lifestyle and the endless admiration it brought her. Her favorite salon revoked her credit line. Her so-called friends stopped answering her calls. The high-end designer boutiques where she once flaunted her family name now had staff who treated her like an unwelcome stranger. She lashed out, blaming everyone: the banks, her father's employees, her parents, but her deepest, most irrational blame was reserved for Benny. "She's a curse," Lee shrieked one afternoon, pacing frantically around the living room, which now felt cavernously empty without the staff. "Ever since she showed up here asking those questions, everything has gone wrong. She brings bad luck. I knew it." Her mother sat silently on a dusty sofa, staring at a mountain of unpaid bills, too drained to respond. Her father tried to calm her down, but he too was suffocating under the weight of his own shame and failure. Deep down, they all sensed that this was no coincidence, but their pride was too great to admit that their own arrogance had led them to this point. The final blow for Lee came when an eviction notice was taped to the door of her luxury apartment. The landlord stood by impassively as she hysterically threw her expensive clothes into suitcases. "You can't do this to me," she sobbed. "Do you have any idea who I am?" But no one cared who she was anymore. Her name, once a key that opened any door, was now worthless. With nowhere else to turn, she was forced to swallow her pride and go to the one person she had sworn she would never need. Benny. It was late when she arrived, knocking timidly on the door of Benny's simple apartment. When Benny opened it, she was surprised to find her sister, disheveled and tear-streaked, wearing clothes that, while expensive, looked like they had been slept in. Lee managed a shaky, desperate smile. "Sister, please. I need your help. We're family, aren't we?" Her voice trembled as she reached out a hand. A pathetic attempt at warmth. Benny stood there for a long moment, her expression unreadable, simply looking at her sister. This was the same sister who had called her useless. The same sister who had laughed as their parents cut her off on her birthday. The same sister who had carelessly enjoyed every luxury that Benny's secret work had provided. Now that Lee's world had gone dark, she suddenly remembered she had a sister. Benny stepped aside, letting her in. She poured her a glass of water and watched as Lee drank it down like she was dying of thirst. Finally, Benny spoke, her voice calm and even. "Family doesn't throw you away when things get hard, Lee." Her tone wasn't angry, It was just tired, like an old wound that had been reopened too many times. Lee's face instantly hardened. Her victimhood replaced by her old arrogance. So, this is it. You're enjoying this, aren't you? You think you're so much better than us now, she snapped, her pride flaring back to life. Benny didn't reply. She just turned and walked to the window, looking out at the rainy city. No words were necessary. A few minutes later, Lee stormed out, slamming the door behind her. As the apartment returned to silence, Benny slowly sat down. She didn't feel triumph or revenge. She just felt a quiet, resolute peace. Her sister still had no idea that Benny held the power to restore everything they had lost with a single phone call. But she wouldn't make that call. Not yet. Some lessons could only be learned in the suffocating silence of loss. The once glorious Doro mansion was now a ghost of its former self. The sprawling gardens were overgrown and withered. The staff was long gone. The gates, which had once welcomed a steady stream of luxury cars, were now shut and starting to rust. A thick stack of letters from the bank lay on the marble entryway table, each one a cold, official notice of foreclosure. Mr. Doro had exhausted every option. He had begged old friends, called in forgotten favors, and humbled himself before investors, but no one would touch him. The name Doro Holdings had become toxic in the business world. One morning, after another soul-crushing visit to the bank that ended in public humiliation, Mr. Doro sat in his old car for a long time, just staring at the worn steering wheel. His pride, the very thing he had valued above all else, was now the unbearable weight that was crushing the life out of him. His thoughts drifted to Benny. For the first time, he saw a flash of his own cruelty, his own blindness. He saw the quiet, overlooked daughter who had never asked for anything. With a deep, shuddering sigh, he started the engine and drove to her office. His suit, once a symbol of his power, was now faded and wrinkled. He felt completely out of place the moment he stepped into the sleek, bustling lobby of Benny Doro Enterprises. It was bright, modern, and filled with energetic employees who greeted Benny with genuine respect as she walked through the office. A young receptionist approached him. "Sir, can I help you? Do you have an appointment?" He hesitated, the words feeling foreign and shameful on his tongue. I'm her father." Moments later, Benny appeared. She wasn't smiling, but her expression was calm, her posture radiating a quiet confidence he had never seen before. "Dad," she said, her voice even, "please, come in." He followed her into her office, his eyes darting around the elegant space. But it wasn't the stunning city view or the expensive furniture that made his blood run cold. It was the logo printed on a stack of documents on her desk. It was the distinct logo of their mystery investor, the one he had seen on hundreds of payment receipts over the years. He froze, his body going numb, and raised a trembling hand to point at it. This is you." Benny didn't say a word. She simply opened a drawer, retrieved a thick binder, and placed it gently on the desk in front of him. Inside were years of financial records. Every single payment Doro Holdings had ever received from her partner company. And there, at the bottom of every single page, was her signature, clear and unwavering. Benny Doro. Mr. Doro's eyes widened in horror as he flipped through the pages, the reality crashing down on him with the force of a tidal wave. "It's been you," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "All this time." Benny gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, her face a mask of calm composure. "Yes, Dad. Every car, every vacation, every designer dress. It all came from me." He collapsed into a chair, the strength leaving his body. He was speechless. Tears, hot with shame and disbelief, welled in his eyes and streamed down his face. "Why?" he choked out. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" Benny looked at her broken father, her expression softening just a fraction. "Because," she said quietly, "you never asked." For the first time in his life, Mr. Doro truly saw his daughter, not as the quiet, invisible girl he had dismissed, but as the powerful, resilient woman who had single-handedly held his entire world together, all while doing it in complete and utter silence. A few days after her father's visit, the entire Doro family showed up at Benny's office. The security guards watched in surprise as the disgraced family, the same people who once looked down on Benny, stood nervously in the lobby of her gleaming glass tower. Her mother entered first, clutching her purse like a shield, her face pale but still desperately trying to project an air of dignity. Lee trailed behind her, her usual fiery confidence gone, replaced by a sullen mix of anger and confusion. They walked straight into Benny's office without being announced. Benny rose slowly from her desk, her demeanor perfectly calm. She didn't look surprised or intimidated. "You're all here," she stated softly, Her mother's voice cut through the tense silence, sharp and accusatory. Benny, why? Why didn't you tell us you were behind all of this? Do you have any idea what we have been through? You could have stopped this at any time. Her voice was thick with a frustration that couldn't quite mask the deep undercurrent of guilt. Benny looked at her mother, a profound sadness in her eyes. I didn't tell you, she said, her voice soft but firm, because you never once asked about my life. You only ever asked what I could do for you. Her mother's mouth opened, then closed. No words came out. Lee stepped forward, her voice dripping with bitterness. So what, Benny? You just let us lose everything to prove a point. This was all about revenge, wasn't it? Her eyes burned with resentment, but beneath it, Benny could see the raw fear of someone who had lost everything. Benny took a step closer, meeting her sister's hostile gaze without flinching. No, Lee, she said gently. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted you to understand. To understand what it feels like to be invisible. What it feels like to speak and never be heard. To give everything you have and never, ever be seen. Her voice never rose, but each word landed with the weight of years of pain. Her father, who had been sitting silently in a corner with his head bowed, finally looked up. He saw his daughter, really saw her, and was overwhelmed by the grace and power she possessed. The room fell into a heavy silence. Even Lee, who always had a sharp retort, was speechless. The undeniable truth hung in the air between them. They finally saw Benny, not as the quiet burden they had dismissed, but as the architect of their entire lives, the pillar that had held them up while they treated her like a shadow. Her mother lowered her gaze, tears finally tracing paths down her cheeks. Lee looked away, her pride visibly cracking. Benny walked back to her desk and sat down, a queen upon her throne. I'm not here to hurt you, she said softly. I just want peace, but I will never go back to being unseen. Her words were a quiet declaration, an end to the conversation. No one replied. The Doros left her office in silence, their hearts heavy with the crushing realization that the daughter they had thrown away was the only reason they ever had anything to throw away at all. The next morning, the business world was rocked by breaking news that no one saw coming. Every major news channel, financial paper, and social media feed blared the same stunning headline. Benny Doro, founder of Luminex Industries, acquires full ownership of Ailing Doro Holdings. Pictures of Benny were everywhere, poised, powerful, and confident. The world was captivated by the story of the silent genius, the quiet daughter of the wealthy Doro family who was, it turned out, the true force behind their success. Her name trended globally. Journalists and business analysts scrambled to piece together her story, dubbing her the woman who built an empire in silence. Inspirational quotes were attributed to her. Videos of her calm demeanor in old, obscure meeting recordings went viral with captions like, "This is what power looks like." Meanwhile, in the near-empty Doro mansion, the family watched the news in stunned disbelief. Every report was a glowing tribute to Benny's brilliance and perseverance. The very reporters who once clamored to interview Lee were now camped outside their gates, shouting questions through the fence. "Mr. Doro, did you know your daughter was the secret investor? Mrs. Doro, how does it feel to be saved by the daughter you ignored? Why was her success hidden for so many years?" They had no answers. They stood frozen in their living room, their public humiliation complete. Their arrogance had cost them not just their company, but their dignity as well. Lee scrolled through her phone, each post praising Benny, feeling like another twist of a knife in her heart. She had craved the spotlight her entire life, and now it was shining brighter than ever on the sister she had called useless. Benny, for her part, remained humble. She issued a simple press release thanking her team and got back to work. She didn't need to gloat or give emotional interviews. The truth was her victory. The family that had made her feel invisible was now forced to watch her light shine so brightly that it illuminated the entire world. Weeks later, a much-changed Lee appeared at Benny's office. She wore simple clothes, her face was bare of makeup, and her eyes were puffy from crying. "Benny, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They've lost everything. The bank took the house, the cars. We have nowhere to go." She looked up at her sister, her eyes pleading. Then, she did something Benny never thought she would see. Lee fell to her knees, sobbing openly. "Please forgive us. We were so wrong. We were awful to you. You're all we have left." Benny looked down at her broken sister, a whirlwind of memories flashing through her mind. The lonely birthdays, the cruel words, the constant feeling of being an outsider in her own family. Yet, seeing Lee so completely humbled, she couldn't find it in her heart to be cruel. She took a long, deep breath. "I'll help you," she said softly. "But things are going to be different now. A few days later, she moved her family into a small, modest home in the countryside, far from the glittering city they once ruled. It was comfortable and clean, but a world away from the luxury they were used to. She stocked their kitchen, set up their utilities, and left them a note. You will never be hungry or homeless again. But everything else, from now on, you will have to earn. When her parents saw the house, they broke down. We don't deserve this kindness, Benny, her father whispered, his voice thick with shame. Her mother could barely meet her eyes. We failed you, she sobbed. Benny offered them a small, faint smile. No, you didn't fail me completely, she replied. Through all the pain, you taught me how to be strong. Lee hugged her, clinging to her tightly. I'm so sorry, Benny, she cried. I was just jealous. I wanted the success you had, not realizing you built it with hard work while I built mine with luck. Benny didn't stay long. This is your new beginning, she said as she left. Make it a good one. As she drove away, she watched the small house shrink in her rearview mirror. She didn't feel vengeful or triumphant. She just felt peace. She had finally closed the most painful chapter of her life. Her family had lost their fortune, but in its place, perhaps they had found something far more valuable: humility. And Benny walked away, finally understanding that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about freeing herself from its weight. The grand ballroom glittered with gold and crystal as Benny stood on stage, the heavy, prestigious award in her hands. 1,000 cameras flashed, and the room thundered with a standing ovation. She looked out at the crowd, her expression calm, radiant, and powerful, the look of a woman who had built an empire not from money, but from pain and perseverance. Taking a deep breath, she leaned into the microphone, her voice steady and clear. My parents cut me off on my birthday, she began, a small, knowing smile on her lips. On that day, I was sure my story had ended. I didn't realize they had just given me the beginning of my legacy. The room fell completely silent, captivated. Sometimes, she continued, being underestimated is the greatest gift you can receive, because when the world counts you out, you learn, very quickly, how to count on yourself. You learn how to build in the shadows, how to grow in silence, and how to shine when no one is watching. The applause that followed was deafening. In the audience, Lee sat between their parents. Her father's face was a mixture of overwhelming pride and deep regret, tears glistening in his eyes. Her mother dabbed at her own tears with a tissue, her body shaking with quiet sobs. They had once called her a burden. Now, they were witnessing her become a global symbol of strength and grace. She did it, Lee whispered, her voice filled with awe. She really did it. Her mother could only nod, her own voice barely audible. We lost her long before we ever knew who she was. As Benny walked off the stage, she passed their table. Her eyes met theirs, and she smiled. It wasn't a smile of anger or triumph. It was a smile of peace. A smile that said, I forgive you. But I will never forget the strength you forced me to find. Later that night, a reporter caught up with her as she was looking out over the city lights. Ms. Doro, what is the one thing you want people to remember from your incredible journey? Benny turned to the camera, her gaze gentle but firm. That silence is not weakness, she said. Sometimes, it's just the sound of someone building their strength. Her story became a legend, not just of business success, but of the indestructible power of the human spirit. The quiet girl they had cast aside had become the woman who rewrote her entire family's destiny.